Okay, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for our alumni webinar series. I'm Dr. Lisa Clark, Associate Head of Language and Linguistics in the School of Education, Language and Psychology. I've been asked to host this webinar as part of York St John University's alumni series, Alumni Journeys, Creativity, Careers and Community. Before I introduce today's speaker, there are a few housekeeping matters. Firstly, we'll be hosting a Q&A at the end of the talk. The questions have been prepared in advance, but if you have any questions you would like to ask the speaker, please email alumni@yorksj.ac.uk and the team will pass on your questions. There is also an auto transcript appearing during the talk for increased accessibility. However, please be aware it may not translate perfectly. Thank you. I would like to introduce you to Lauren Cook. Lauren Cook is a speech and language therapist and currently works for the NHS. In 2017, Lauren graduated from York St John University with a degree in creative writing, linguistics and English language. After graduating from York St John, they completed a master's degree in speech and language therapy from City University of London. They've been a speech and language therapist since 2020 and specialise in children's speech and language therapy. I'd now like to pass you over to Lauren, and I look forward to chatting after. Over to you, Lauren.
Hi Lisa, thank you. Lovely to be back with York St John. It's very exciting for me. So as Lisa said, I'm Lauren. I am currently a specialist speech and language therapist for children with developmental communication disorders, which involves things like autism, selective mutism, and developmental language disorder. So back in 2014, I turned up to York St John with some decent A-level results and not a single clue what I wanted to do with my life. I came to a few open days with some friends and with my mum, and when we got there, my mum said my face just absolutely lit up, and I just felt like I was home straight away. I felt like this was the uni for me, and so it wasn't really a difficult decision for me to come to York St John. So I studied creative writing, linguistics and language, and on one of our very first days we had a lovely event at the quad where we all met each other on our course and some of our lecturers, and it was during that event, I think it was Magda I was speaking to, and she said, "Oh, what would you like to be doing kind of career-wise once you finish with us?" And it was my first week. I had no idea, and I said, "Oh well, I'm really interested in more scientific side of linguistics, but I'd also like to kind of incorporate that with something that's very sociable and where I get to talk to lots of people." No idea what that could possibly be. And she said, "Well, have you ever thought about speech and language therapy?" And not wanting to seem really silly in front of my lecturer on one of my very first days, I said, "Oh no, but that sounds like a great idea." I had never heard of speech and language therapy before, so I went home really quickly and started Googling it and realised that it was exactly the perfect fit. It kind of took all of that medical, scientific, really loving theory part of my brain and mixed it in with how can we help people best. And so at that point I had a couple of meetings with different tutors, and we had a look through all the available modules that there were, what might be helpful for me to take, and really kind of honed that path that I was going to be taking. I always knew that I'd be focusing more on that language and linguistics side of my joint honours rather than the creative writing side. So I was very, very happy to kind of focus in on those modules. So I took the phonetics module that we had to take, and that was really interesting. So I took the advanced phonetics and phonology module. I also did the modules around child and second language acquisition. I did the psycholinguistics module, accents and dialects with Kate, and we also had a whole module called speech and language pathology, which kind of showed us types of assessments you might be using as a therapist, how to use those, how to wrap your head around the maths side of the profession, which definitely was something that I was a little bit worried about going in, but actually having been talked through how to do that maths, how to deal with those statistics, realised that was going to be okay and it was nothing to stress about. And there were loads of extra lovely opportunities for me at York St John. I did my signature British Sign Language course, level 1, which has come in really handy for me. I also did my CELTA qualification, which was around teaching English to adults as a second language, and that was in a joint kind of qualification between York St John and Cambridge, which was really useful for me to have. And also on that more creative side, I also got lots of lovely opportunities to share my writing at York Literature Festival through our creative writing programme. And that was a really useful tool for me to kind of be standing up in front of people, developing those communication skills, those public speaking skills, and I use those all the time in this job. York as a city was full of opportunities as well. Lots of opportunities for me to be volunteering with youth groups for children with special needs, opportunities to volunteer at the hospital, and those all came in really handy when I came to interview for my Masters in London. And as well, just the lovely social side of being at York. Lots of amazing nights out, lots of lovely people, and just a real sense of community in the library and around the university. It was absolutely gorgeous. So when those 3 years had flown by, wasn't 100% sure which university I was going to be applying to for my Masters. At the time, there were 5 universities that were offering speech and language sciences as a Masters. Some of them were offering it as a PG dip qualification, but I decided that I would quite like the Masters. So I applied to 3 of those 5, all of which were kind of down south. One of them was Essex, one was University City. One of them was City University London, the other was UCL. I was invited to interview for City University, and it was a bit like speed dating. There were lots of different lecturers sitting in different rooms, and we kind of had to go between them, and each one had a different list of questions, kind of focusing in on those different areas that are so important for speech and language therapists. So we talked about some previous volunteering experience, we talked about some of those key linguistic approaches that I'd been learning about York St John, about phonology and about grammar and semantics and pragmatics. And I felt really confident in the grounding that I'd had at York St John to be able to answer a lot of those questions. There were also lots of questions around why I felt I was the right type of person to be a speech and language therapist. It is a very caring profession. It's also a profession where there are lots of pressures that we have to balance, and kind of balancing that warm-heartedness with that really pragmatic sense of what needs to be done next. So at university, all of our modules were kind of predefined for us. We didn't have the choice like we did undergrad. So we were all of a sudden doing psychology as well as our linguistics. We were doing really intensive phonology and phonetics courses. We were doing a good amount of medicine with neurology, anatomy and physiology. If it was between the head and the diaphragm, we had to know how it worked. And I think for a lot of us, that was really difficult, a lot of those different modules, because it was so far removed from what some people have been doing. I think I was one of the youngest on the course, and people had come from all kinds of backgrounds. We'd had people from psychology, people from mental health facilities, assisted living facilities, people who'd worked in care homes, and people who'd been working as speech therapy assistants came to the course. We even had a lady who had been a producer on Grand Designs came and joined us on the course. So as long as we could kind of explain why we were so interested and why we felt we were suitable, we could come from a lot of different backgrounds and still kind of be accepted onto that course. And there was, again, a real sense of community. It was a 2-year intensive masters, so we were there every day, kind of for 2 to 3 days a week in university, and the rest of the week we'd be on blocks of placement. Placement started almost straight away, so we went to a range of different settings. I was lucky enough to have the bulk of my placement be in hospitals in Barking and Redbridge NHS Trust. I was in some rehabilitation and acute stroke wards for about 6 months. I also did a stint in a traumatic brain injury unit, which was really interesting. And a lot of the therapists in that setting were doing some really impressive things and making some really big strides in what a speech and language therapist's role looked like. They were taking part in surgeries like awake craniotomies, and we got the opportunities to kind of sit in on those, and that was absolutely mind blowing. And made me, who's a little bit squeamish, kind of want to run and hide. But it was a really useful learning experience, and getting to pull on all the different professionals in a place like those hospitals was really useful and gave us a taste of what it's like to work in a multidisciplinary team. My next set of placements was actually in secondary schools in the borough of Merton in London, which is quite close to places like Croydon. And it was a client group that I'd never really considered before. When you picture speech and language therapy, you either picture yourself in those really high pressure wards in a hospital, or kind of in primary schools working with teeny tiny kids on their speech sounds. So being in a room where you're in a group with 5 young people who are all much taller than you were at 14 and having some really difficult communication disorders, it was a really important experience for me for building up my confidence as a practitioner and putting together management plans, assessing people, talking to their parents about their care, and all the other shareholders in the care. Again, it was a very different flavour of a multidisciplinary team, but I think that was really useful for me. And I just absolutely loved working with that client group. I thought it was amazing and something that I'd never expected to do. So when I graduated, I was offered a job within that team that I'd been on placement for, and I was running intervention assessment management for kids across 7 secondary schools across Merton. The team was run by the local authority, so we were seeing children with education, health and care plans and supporting them to reach their academic goals. And if you think about speech and language therapy, the speech therapy and the language therapy are 2 very different roles within that title. And it was predominantly those language therapies that I was carrying out. I absolutely loved that role, and I was really sad to leave it. But when COVID hit, it was really difficult for us living so far from our family up in the northeast. So we went into teletherapy for a little while. We were doing therapy over Zoom, and that was, we were lucky it was really accessible for a lot of our children. A lot of our young people were already very tech savvy, and because mum and dad were doing Teams meetings and Zoom meetings, they quite enjoyed having their own little Zoom meetings to come to. Some of them kind of put the school uniforms on and got really dressed up for it as well, which was absolutely gorgeous to see. But after a while, it was just a really difficult time to be living in London, and opportunities started to present themselves back up in the northeast. So my partner and myself both decided to pack our little bags and come back home. So then I became a band 6 therapist in the NHS trust I currently work in, which is Hartlepool and North Tees. And in this role, I kind of had to restitch those 2 halves of speech therapy back together, because for the first time I was doing speech sound therapy as well. And the age range I was working with got a lot wider. So all of a sudden I was working with children from kind of a year and a half old all the way up to 25 years old. That's kind of where our service covers. And we were doing a range of things, working on speech sounds, delays and disorders, as well as seeing those children. Sorry. As well as seeing those children with language disorders, developmental language disorders, autism, selective autism. I was in that post for a year and a half, and as of recording this webinar 2 days ago, I was offered a specialist position in developmental communication disorders, so really focusing in on those children with developmental language disorders, selective mutism, and also autism, which I'm very excited to dig into a little bit more. But that's my story from kind of joining York St John up to now.
It was really interesting to hear about your experiences and what it was like getting onto the course, and actually what the speech and language therapy training was like. I've got a few questions that I got from students on my speech and language pathology module, which is still running.
Gorgeous. That was one of the most useful modules I ever did. It was so useful to kind of dig into how the profession actually ticks and works.
No, I mean, I love running it. It's, it is my sort of, well, that and language and literacy are my two faves, if you know what I mean. Um, so questions that the students have sent, first of all, then I think we'll go there first. It was like, um, I think you've part answered this, but it was like, what kind of backgrounds did the students on the SLT course come from, and how do you think your background in linguistics helped you in particular?
I think a lot of students had come from kind of very science-based backgrounds. We had lots of psychology students, and we had actually one chap who had been working in language policy for the Welsh government. We had lots of people who'd taken gap years to go and work for various charities like Age UK, or to be doing something within the NHS if it was admin for one of their clinical teams. People came from all over, and lots of people had done things abroad, like volunteering in children's homes and things like that. We also had a lot of students from around the world. It wasn't kind of just UK-based students, so they had some really interesting opportunities that we might not necessarily have as well. I think that having done linguistics was a huge help, because that was one of the very first areas we started to dig into on that master's, to really get a sense of what is communication.
Yeah.
You have to understand how that all works before you can start trying to diagnose where the breakdown is. So once we had a sense of how that grammar was working, how the phonology was working, that's when we could do kind of those more specialized modules. And I know a lot of people found it really tricky to get their head around a lot of those concepts.
Yeah.
And a lot of those approaches. And I had kind of all those materials that I'd religiously saved every week from Moodle down to make sure I kind of still had them all with me. So that was kind of a huge help as well to look back through everything that I'd done before at York St John.
No, it's really nice to hear. I would sort of imagine like things like having a bit of knowledge of phonetics and those sorts of things going into it would be really helpful, because I could imagine on a 2-year intensive masters things move at a fair pace.
Absolutely, I think kind of coming in already knowing basics of transcription saved me so much time and headache, and I think it was really nice to be able to help the others around you as well, kind of to point out kind of areas or resources that they might be able to use to help themselves, because we'd already been using them. And I think it made that transition a lot easier, because a lot of those core concepts I wasn't having to struggle with for the first time. I already felt pretty confident in a lot of them.
That's really nice to hear, because we want to be preparing students for these kinds of careers. Okay, this is another question from student here is, what do you wish you knew about the career before you started your SLT training? And is there anything you wish you'd been better prepared for?
Oh, that is a great question. I think it would have been reassuring to know that it's not a profession where when you leave that master's, you know everything you're ever going to know and you're a finished therapist ready for the world. It is a profession where you are constantly learning from the other people around you. There's always research happening, so we're always taking on board new ways of working. For example, recently we've just started incorporating Gestalt language processing into our practice. So kind of looking at those whole processing systems that children use, rather than kind of sticking to that traditional, typically developing framework. So just kind of digging into the research, taking supervision from the people around you, giving supervision. I think if I'd known before, I would have been much less worried about whether it was a profession I could do, because I would have known that that community support was there.
This question came in from a few different students. So what do you think are the most important skills that courses are looking for in applicants?
I think they are looking at resilience an awful lot more now. I think they are very aware that it's a very intensive course and that you need to be able to dedicate your whole time to it. So they're looking for people who have kind of demonstrated really, really good time management, who've been able to complete the studies as well as maybe dipping into some volunteering opportunities, or some relevant part-time work, or people who've then managed to take the time afterwards to do that. And I think they're looking for people who really care. And I think there's lots of ways we can show that. They're looking at what your core motivation to join the profession is. And we know that we're a profession under a lot of stress at the moment. Caseloads go up, funding goes down. So they're looking at kind of what your core motivation is for being there and how you're going to apply the skills that you have, whatever they may be, to the caseloads that are presented to you. So what are your key skills? Like, how can you plan a caseload? How can you do management plans and intervention? And how can you balance all of that? I think they're really looking at how you cope with that.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're juggling a lot of things at the same time in that role, aren't you? What else have I got? So what are the hardest and best parts about training to become an SLT?
Oh, I think for me personally, it was a lot more emotional than I was expecting it to be. We'd be kind of sitting in a lecture and an MRI scan would go up on the board. So on one level, you're thinking, this is really complex medicine that we're looking at here. This isn't necessarily what I was expecting. But then also you're hearing a story about someone's life who's been impacted really severely from a car crash or a stroke. And you are getting quite a lot of details about that person as part of the case history, about their family, about their language use, and trying to paint a picture of what communication could look like for them from now on. So I think a lot of us got quite invested in those cases, and it was quite upsetting the first couple of times around when we had those sessions. But again, that's you building that professional distance, building that resilience, and that experience with those different client groups. And I think that leads to kind of the best bits of that course, which is that sense of community that you develop with those other trainee therapists.
Yeah.
Absolutely gets you through the course. You know, you have an absolutely disastrous session on placement because no session is ever perfect. And you and your placement buddy, because you're very rarely on your own on placement, you say, you know what, let's go to the pub and let's have a chat about it, or let's go and just get a cup of coffee. And just that sense of community, having that group of friends to fall back on, of kind of all ages, it was really useful actually.
That sounds, yeah, it sounds like a really yeah, there's so much to that you've experienced sort of in that training, and whilst it's really demanding, I can also imagine it's really rewarding at the same
Absolutely,
time.
having those breakthroughs with, you know, those kids if you're in skill placement, or those adults on rehab wards, it's just hugely fulfilling. And when you do something that you think is actually going to impact someone when they leave that session and it's going to be part of their life, so you give someone a piece of AAC that they're going to use forever to communicate and they're really confident in it, that's such a good feeling. And knowing that even if that doesn't work out for them, they know that there is someone that they're going to feel safe enough to come back to, and try something new.
Yeah. Well, I've got some more questions. Okay, so one thing that the students are quite concerned about is the work experience expectations for applicants to SLT courses, and a little bit around the changes since COVID. So what experience do you think current students should be trying to get before graduating, if possible?
I think volunteering is such a key part of an application. So I did about 6 months of volunteering once or twice a week with a kids club. I can't remember the name of it. It was just behind the university on Lowther Street. But they Snappy, yes, that was it. And they had lots of children with additional needs going in. Um, and they would run kind of after school clubs and weekend clubs and trips, and kind of going along to chaperone those, just to be a body on the ground, getting to know those kids.
Yeah.
I think that really helped me in that application process, as well as kind of the sense of the caseloads I would be working with, and making sure that was something that I felt resilient enough to cope with. And I think a lot of people did volunteering with charities like Age UK, with stammer charities and stroke charities. Um, some people had done volunteering in care homes, in mental health facilities. Lots of people had done volunteering as things like hospital porters. So it didn't necessarily need to be with the client groups we were working with, but just to have a knowledge of how hospitals work, um, where the flow of people is going, what the teams look like, anything that you've spent your time doing will be applicable. It's just knowing which skills to pull out of that and to talk about in an interview, I think can be part of kind of the trickiness of that situation.
Yeah, so pulling out those sort of transferable skills that you're getting from those different experiences is probably the important bit.
Absolutely. It's lovely if they do happen to be kind of in primary schools with children who have speech disorders, but that's quite a difficult experience to get hold of, despite that being kind of a speech and language therapist bread and butter. So they know that you're never going to be able to access the full spectrum of what it is a speech therapist does. Especially as a young person, kind of in your first couple of years of university, still figuring out that that's what you want to spend your life doing. I think they're very sensitive to that, and they're much more looking for, as we said, how you can present those transferable skills and that motivation that you have.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. I think the students that I know that are sort of looking at pursuing opportunities have got sort of varied levels of experience, and they're also, you know, sometimes finding it more difficult because it opportunities have been less accessible since COVID, although that seems to be getting better now, but it has been quite difficult for people. Right, I'm going to turn to some questions about your time at York St John's. So,
Yes.
first of all, we mentioned transferable skills. So, what transferable skills do you think you developed from the degree that you did?
I think time management was a huge skill that is still really useful for me today. I think being lucky enough to be in a career where I run my own diary, I book my own clinics, I kind of prioritize my own reviews, and kind of booking everything in, making sure everything is balanced, and really knowing myself and how much time it takes me to complete an admin task. I think that skill kind of starts from you are 18 years old on your own for the first time in the big wide world. No one's telling you you've got homework to do, and no one's kind of on your shoulder reminding you to get it done. It is you attending those lectures, kind of making the notes that are useful for you, taking yourself off home and allotting yourself how much time you think you need to practice. So there were lots of nights of me sitting watching movies and trying to transcribe them for my phonetics and phonology modules, and kind of getting my practice in that way, just trying to plan how I could have the most effective revision strategies. And all those hours spent writing essays have been really useful in kind of getting a professional academic voice to write in that I use for my reports now. Lots of those kind of key phrases that I came up with at university, I feel I still pop in reports now, and they're my constant kind of touchstones to go back to. And those presentation skills are really important for me now. As part of my Band 6 role here, I'm part of our health promotion and workforce development team. So that's lots of providing training to schools and nurseries, colleges about communication. And I think all of those skills have taken a long old time to develop. But if I hadn't have been presenting my dissertation back at York St John, that isn't a journey I would have gone on. And thinking back to the very nervous Lauren who was standing there with a dissertation in her hand, shaking, it's been a really important journey for me to take from that point.
Yeah, I think a lot of our students find the presentations really nerve-wracking, but it's obviously such an important skill for people to work on and overcome those anxieties around
Absolutely.
presenting too.
If you told me then that I would absolutely love presenting now and it was one of my favourite parts of my job, I would have thought you were crazy. I would have thought you were talking about a different girl. But it absolutely is. And it feels like the end of the world when you're in that situation, having to present that for the first time. But it's such an important skill, and everybody's in the same boat in that room as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we still do with the dissertation. We have that presentation week, so and there's always a lot of nerves in the room. So nothing's changed here as far as that's concerned. Okay, another question for you. Favorite memory of York St John University?
Oh, I met my partner at York St John. Um, so Jessie Goff, who was also on our course. So we met in a linguistics module. I think it was pretty early on, and then kind of all the lectures that we spent sitting next to each other and kind of getting to know each other. I think that was so important for us, and a lot of my friends came from those modules as well. So I think it was a time where I was really building my community around myself. It's a lot of where I spent a lot of time learning who I am, and it was just so formative, and it just felt like being at home, and it was just the most perfect place I can imagine for kind of having that experience.
Brilliant. No, it's lovely to hear. Um, and what's the single best piece of advice you've been given by somebody during your career journey? If you can pick one.
Ooh. I think, oh, this is a really tricky one. I think advice around capacity and demand has been really important for me. Um, Knowing what you have capacity to give in any situation is really important, to
Yeah.
the point where obviously services have demand, services have waiting lists, but that's not necessarily your fault as a practitioner. All you can do is turn up on the day and say, I can see this number of children a day and give them the absolute top level of care that I can provide. Um, and not feeling like there's a waiting list of X months. I need to get more kids in to get more kids seen so they're not waiting for so long. If it means they wait another day, another week, but the standard of care they get is so much higher, I think that balance is a really important thing to learn without having to take on the guilt of that as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that, yeah, as something that would really be important to manage. Okay, well, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and talking to me today. It's been really, really lovely to hear about what you've been doing since you graduated from York St John, and good luck in the new job. It sounds like a really exciting opportunity.
Thank you. I am really excited, and just thank you for having me back. It's been lovely to kind of reminisce and just reflect on what a crazy journey it has been for the past, I think we said 8 years when we were doing the maths, since I was wandering around the quad lost.
I still can't believe it's that long ago, to be honest. But you've packed a lot into that time, and
It's been
to hear,
busy.
yeah, and to hear where your career's going is absolutely amazing. So thank you for coming back and sharing that with us. It's been really lovely. Um, just like to say thanks everybody for listening, and I hope that it's been useful for you. And that's it from us. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.